Right. That's hilarious. Um, anyway, we are at TMC Connect. I'm Tony Bramley. I'm the business development coordinator here. We are talking, actually, right now, we're talking football, but we've got Eric Levin with us, and he is with Model Match. Model Match is one of the newest preferred partners within the TMC network, and we really appreciate Eric being here today. So, hello, Eric.
Hello, thanks for having me, Tony. It's been fun working with you and the team for what's only been a handful of weeks, I guess, since we partnered. I've talked to Rich kind of on and off over the years and had a chance to meet Thomas and the team, and super excited about Terranea, by the way. So it'll be fun to meet everybody and the company partners that are going to be out there as well. So looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Are you prepared, by the way? Is everything all set up and organized? You had a schedule?
We are all spinning as many plates as we can possibly spin, and we are just keeping those plates spinning. Yes, we are just buttoning everything up right now. We've got about 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks out. So we are getting everything finalized and ready for some in-person conversations. I was laughing that they asked us to kind of do a little quick thing on, why we were excited to go. And I was like, I just want to know what everybody looks like from the shoulders up. I mean, the shoulders down, because it's like,
right.
the only thing that I've ever seen is just like from shoulders up. So anyway.
Are you saying that I can't wear my board shorts out to the event? I have to actually put on pants and seem professional when I'm out there? Is that what we're saying?
I would not go that far. No.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, today we are talking about a word that you don't like very much. So the title of the conversation today is "Stop Recruiting and Start Building Value." And I have listened to several of your podcasts. Eric has a very popular podcast, The Walk, and in it he has organic conversations with just industry leaders. So I want to talk about that as well. Like, how do you find these people, and how do you get those conversations going? But in one of your conversations, you talked about how you do not like the term recruiter. So I wanted to start there. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, maybe it might go. And by the way, thank you again for having me on. Super excited to maybe get our names and faces out a little bit ahead of the event in Terranea, where we can spend some more time with everybody face to face. By the way, I'll be at the pool, so if anybody wants to meet with me for 15 or 20 minutes, in my board shorts, that the rest of the team will be inside somewhere, but I'll be out by the pool. I remember when I was in college, Tony, I was an athlete growing up, and then I got hurt, and I was putting myself through school as a trainer. I found out that you can make a lot of money on an hourly basis as a quote personal trainer. And I lived on the coast of North Carolina, where a lot of people invested in things like that. And I met a young lady that was a recruiter, and she did really well for herself, at least it seemed that way. And when I asked her about, well, what does that mean to be a recruiter? She explained she works with companies that have open positions, and she builds relationships with, but also uses various farming and prospecting methods to identify people that meet a particular skill set and that are open or looking for a job, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I thought recruiting was, outside the fact that, the military recruiters that were maybe calling me when I was in high school to join the Army or the Marines or whatever. That was a recruiter to me also.
So something transactional, like a once and done kind of thing.
It's the difference between passive and active, right? Mm-hmm. In that case, you have an open project, an open job, and you have very specific skill sets, and you have resumes that come in that either meet those skill sets or they don't meet the skill sets. And if they do, well, then maybe that then leads to a phone call with HR, and then that phone call leads to eventually a hiring manager, and so on and so forth. That's at least how my brain viewed recruiting. And then about 20 years ago, I got introduced to this industry when I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, right? I had gone to school to work on my master's in physiology, and I was still thinking I was going to stay on that sports athletic track. And much longer story, but I ended up getting connected to this industry, recruiting in the mortgage banking space. And what I figured out pretty quickly was that on the production side of the house, that's not the way recruiting works. You definitely have some people that are trying to solution pain, but generally as an organization, whether you're increasing or growing your retail channel or your wholesale channel or your correspondent channel, the quickest way to grow that channel is what? It's through an acquisition of volume, of revenue, either an individual or a group or an acquisition that can, number one, meet your company's value proposition, but number two, brings transferable business with them.
Right.
Well, those people aren't looking for a job. And those people are not actively, right? They don't actively have
They're
their
not sending you their
floating
resume.
around. No, they're, and even and in our industry, even those folks that have bad days are still the good ones. They're still making good money and their job's not at risk necessarily. And so that's not recruiting. That's something else. And anybody that wants to help me come up with a better name for this, please, I would love to survey and let's do a contest and come up with a name. I haven't found a better name, but that's why I don't like the word recruiting. Here's another reason why I don't like it. There's been, over the years, I've been fortunate enough to stand in front of large groups of branch managers, regional managers, heads of productions, presidents at their corporate events. I'm going to one in San Diego next week. After that, I'm in Wisconsin at another one, and after that, I'm with you guys at Terranea. And I've started off a lot of discussion groups or presentations to branch. Let's just take retail for a second. Branch managers. When you're told by your leadership that you need to recruit, you need to fill empty desks, or you need to open up in markets where you don't have a presence, and the word recruiting comes up. It's time to recruit. How does that make you feel? And I'm telling you, Tony, everybody, or most people in the crowd, their shoulders drop, their head drop. It's not a positive
Anxiety
thing.
in the room is
Anxiety
palatable.
grows up. They're looking over their shoulder to see if the regional or head of production's looking at them, right? And it creates this anxiety. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that maybe we can talk about later. But after we go through some exercises, you start to learn very quickly that the people in the room, the people on your team, the local managers, the area leadership, the regional leadership, the national leadership, they already have the muscle necessary to be successful growing their branch or growing their region or growing their company. But they get hung up on the early stages. And the word recruiting becomes a trigger, if you ask me. So that's one of the reasons why I don't like the word recruiting, and I say stop recruiting. What you should start is a process by which you can identify and then prospect and then build relationships that eventually lead to what should be a consistently valuable pipeline. You can't time when that pipeline is going to convert because it's based on a lot of things. And let me tell you, one of those things it's based upon are these crazy little creatures called human beings that are not linear by any means. You might think it's the perfect time for them to join your company, but they're not a commodity. They're not a widget. They're a human who has a good day and a bad day, who is really unhappy with their leadership. And then the day that you think that you're going to close them, that's the day leadership shows up at their office and takes them out to lunch and makes them feel good again. Just happens that way, right?
Right.
But if you manage this process, or you manage this as a process and not an event, it starts to remove a lot of this anxiety around recruiting. The hard part's the beginning, but once the wheels are in motion and the gears are in motion, a lot of that pipeline is kind of fun because now you're staying in touch with people that you actually have a trusted relationship with. So anyway, to answer your question, that's why I don't like the word recruiting. And it's also where we came up with the concept for Model Match, the technology and the processes that are baked in to the software solution that is Model Match.
Yeah. Well, and talking about Model Match and the things, and we'll go there in just a second. With building value. So when a company comes to you and they say, when should I start recruiting? What should I do? How do you address that? How do you get them to that right point?
Yeah, great question. More than when do I start recruiting, the question is when's the best time to recruit? And usually the way that I'll answer that is with that they're asking the wrong question. The question isn't when's the best time to recruit. The question I think they're asking is there a best time to close a recruit? Is there a best time to convert the recruit? So let's back up a little bit. for those managers that have had experience coming up as an originator, let's say, which I think most managers on the retail side of this industry came up as an originator. They started off as a loan officer, and the progression in our industry is producing or non-producing manager, and then maybe there's some left-hand turns or right-hand turns along the way. But when you coach a new loan officer, or not even a new one, you coach a loan officer that's doing $1 million a month in volume, and they want to do 24 million a month, 24 million in annual volume, so 1 million a month to 2 million a month. What do you do to get that LO to grow their business? Well, there's a number of things, right? But one of the things is that the person's only doing $1 million a month. And granted, I understand some markets are different. $1 million a month in Mobile, Alabama is going to be different than $1 million a month in Orange County, California. Nonetheless, though, the first thing you can look at is, well, we need to increase your referral sources. You need to have more relationships with realtors, builders, CPAs, attorneys, whatever the case may be. Well, how do you go do that? Well, you identify those that are doing the type of business that meet our value proposition, and you go out and you start building relationships with them. So let me ask that branch manager the question: when is the best time to tell that loan officer to start developing those relationships? Is it in the winter? Is it in the summer? Is it when rates are going up? Is it when rates are going down? Do I wait until Chairman Powell comes back from Jackson Hole and tells us something that we think is going to change the world? You know, it's none of those things. The answer is not tomorrow. The answer is right now. So starting the process of recruiting, it should never end. That process starts with identifying opportunities that meet a specific criteria in a specific geography, right? And then you move it to the next step. You identify prospects. We've got tremendous amount of data tools now that can help us identify prospects and markets. Model Match has a tool called Market Insights that we utilize inside of the app that allows the user to stay inside of the application, do their prospecting and their identification, and then have a process by which they can then take action on those that meet those criteria. But to answer the question, when do I start? Well, the answer is not tomorrow. However, there is an environment that can support more fertile recruiting grounds as well. So if your value proposition is broken, or you as a leader don't know how to confidently communicate your value proposition, well, then you ought to do a little bit of work first before you start trying to have conversations with people about your value proposition. But the process of starting recruiting happens before you pick up the phone and make a phone call, or before you meet somebody at an industry event, or before you send them a text message, or before you connect with them on LinkedIn, like we could fill in a lot more blanks from there. The process actually starts with the identification and using data and analytics tools to identify who those opportunities are, what those opportunities are in your backyard, and then making sure that you actually have fertile recruiting grounds and understanding your core competencies, your company value proposition, as well as your local value proposition.
Yeah, when we were talking about, how they pay attention to their organization, right? So they need to look at inside their environment and then outside their environment, and try to gauge what that timeline is going to look like for them. You had talked about 6 core components of kind of reviewing that process.
Yeah, no, so the 6 core components came before the technology, before Model Match. So my business partner, Drew Waterhouse, and I started and grew a company called Hammer House, which was the recruiting firm that ultimately became Model Match. And at Hammer House, we believe that to be successful in growing with individuals and opportunities that have transferable books of business, that not only you can successfully partner with, but successfully retain, that there's both a science and an art to that process. The art to the process is like what you and I are doing right now, right? We're comfortably having a conversation. Before people joined in, I was asking you about the Cowboys, and we're joking around a little bit about your husband being a Cowboy fan, and I'm not, but I'm sure your husband and I would get along wonderfully. But there's an art to having that type of communication, right? To comfortably communicating with someone else and looking for something to say that ultimately is going to be interesting to that person. The 6 core components, though, are a little bit more of the science. The science of the puzzle pieces. What are the things that are going to make you feel confident that there's something about your value proposition that creates value for the individual opportunity? And I say opportunity because it could be a loan officer, it could be a branch, it could be a wholesale account executive, it could be a correspondent By the way, it can also be non-sales. It can be a processor, an underwriter. And remind me, let's talk about that later, because there is an art to recruiting non-sales positions as well, that if you do it long enough and properly, you end up in a spot where you're actually not recruiting anymore. And so remind me, we can talk about that. But the 6 core components were basically given to us through surveys that we did over years and conversations with leadership and recruits as well, that basically told us that this is how they define their company and this is how they define themselves relative to their own business. And those core components are business, leadership, culture, technology, operations, and geography. And there's a lot of bullets that are then underneath each one of those core components, as you can imagine. So, operations could be centralized or decentralized. How do you manage loan flow? Who picks up after a full application? There's a lot of things inside of operations. Technology crosses over operations a little bit, right? You've got your LOS, you've got your POS, but then you also have CRM functionality. And what are you doing with social media? Business are things like, what does your company look like across some statistics? Your volume, your purchase to refi mix, your product mix, what does your servicing portfolio look like? So on and on. We can go down that list for quite a while and do that exercise. As an organization, those 6 core components define who you are. And there's validating stories, if you sit down and spend the time to think about it, relative to those 6 core components, where you can prove concept. One of those core components, or all of them, have created value for a loan officer or a branch manager. Here, I'll give you an example of that. And Tony, feel free to rein me in. You know me well enough to know at this point that I'll go off on tangents. So
You're good.
Here's the difference between a bullet or a statement and a validating story. And it matters to the people that you're trying to build your business with, because they're hearing bullets from every company. They're hearing statements from every company. So here's one example. Oh, our operations is awesome. We're decentralized. We close loans in under 30 days. Our underwriting terms are XYZ. We're crushing it. That's a statement. That's a statement. A validating story, though, would be that you're talking to someone and over time you're building a relationship with them. It generally isn't going to happen in the very first phone conversation. But as you've built some trust and you're asking them questions about what's working and what's not working, maybe you know that their goal is to increase their volume by 25%, or maybe it's to decrease their time by 25%. We could talk about that in a minute as well. But one of the hangups is something that's happening after application in the operations process, let's say. Well, a validating story might be when somebody mentions that to you, to be able to come back to them and say, it's interesting that you bring that up, because we actually just partnered with someone from XYZ company. I'm not going to even attempt to make up a company name here, because there's lots of great companies out there. And so I don't want to accidentally throw somebody
And you know
under
who you
the bus.
are.
You're all awesome. XYZ company, they just came over about 6 months ago. And one of the challenges that they were having were similar to yours. And so based upon the way that we're managing loan flow, that loan officer actually has about 20 to 25% more time now. And what they've done with that time is they've used that time to develop a new referral partner relationship. And they're getting 1 or 2 new units a month now in the same amount of time. That's a validating story. And there's lots of validating stories. We can bolt on a validating story to technology, to leadership, to culture, to business, even to geography. But those are the 6 core components. The more confident you can be in communicating your value proposition with validating stories relative to those core components, the more you can show the person you're talking to them to how you create value for them, because you're using a validating story based upon something they shared with you. You're not product dumping, which is what most companies do when they go to recruit. They step up to the pond. Here's my analogy. They step up to the pond. They've got their rod and reel. They stick a lure on the end of the hook, and they throw it in the pond. And that lure is construction product. And you stand there, and you wait for a fish to bite. And fish don't bite. You reel it back in. Take the lure off the hook. Stick another one on. Awesome CRM technology. Throw that into the pond. Nobody's biting. Well, the problem is, number one, you haven't identified whether or not you're fishing in the right pond, because you didn't do the pre-work to identify the individual opportunities you want to build a relationship with. And number two, you're not confident in your own value proposition to actually engage somebody in dialogue, ask open-ended questions, and then bolt something on about your value proposition that creates value for them. And by the way, let's play it forward. If it creates value for them, and let's assume we're talking to a loan officer, if it creates value for them, who else does it create value for? Their referral partners. And if it creates value for their referral partners, what might that mean? The referral partners might send them more business, or might introduce them to a new real estate agent or a new attorney or a new CPA. What about a wholesale account executive? Same sort of thing. Wholesale AE is not going to join your company if they don't think that you create value not only for them, but for their business partners, the brokers that they do business with. Well, if you can create more value for them, and right now, let's say you're capturing 60% of that broker's business because they're signed up with multiple companies. What if you can increase that to just 65 across 10 active accounts? That's real business. It's real business for everybody. So that's where the art and the science of those core components play a real role, not only in the confidence to have the conversation, but the ability to create value for the person you're talking to. And then finally, the ability to confidently set future actions. Mm-hmm. So if I'm talking to you and we end our conversation about something that was important to you relative to technology, let's say, but in the midst of that conversation, you bring up something relative to operations or leadership or culture. At the end of the hour that we've scheduled together, I get to confidently say, hey, Tony, you mentioned something earlier in the call about leadership and how leadership is creating value. Here's what I'd like to do. Let's look at the calendar. Let's look at our schedules for Tuesday. I'd like to pull in our head of production, or I'd like to pull in our regional manager. I want to introduce you to that person. But obviously this is important to you. And I think it'd create a ton of value to make that happen. When can we make that happen? The worst thing you can do in recruiting is end a call with no future action, which we can get into in just a second. But the confidence of those 6 core components, the confidence of communicating a validating story makes it that much easier to also confidently schedule a future action.
Right. Well, and kind of the purpose of our call today is talking about not recruiting but building value, and that's what you just talked about, right? So you just set it up. So that's the perfect example of how you increase your talent acquisition. So we won't call it recruiting, talent acquisition. So how do you get people to that? How do you help them to see that whole picture? I know that you have in the past have used a comparison to the loan process.
Sure.
So everything is tracked, everything is seen, everything is dotted and signed off on and check marked, and it nothing happens until that one is completed. And is that what helps them get to that the process that they're looking for?
Totally. So a story that I'll bolt on to that. I think it was around 2011. Drew and I had started Hammer House, and things were going well. Keep in mind, we started Hammer House in 2008. And we all remember what 2008 was like.
Right.
Our wives at the time were asking us, "Wait, you're going to invest capital in what?" I'm watching the news. A mortgage banking, recruiting firm. That sounds crazy. So anyway, we doubled down on the industry, and super happy and proud that we actually did that at the time. And so fast forward 2 or 3 years later, we're out of that environment. It's 2011. I was meeting with about a client, the CEO of a retail origination company that was maybe 8 to 10 billion in size at the time. So, decent size for 2011. And we had already been working with them, supporting their strategic growth efforts. They had retained us, so we were in multiple markets, and we were providing deliverables to them on Excel spreadsheets, because that's what we had. There was no platform that did what Model Match does. And there still is no other platform other than Model Match. But we were utilizing static Excel spreadsheets. But what we were providing for them was this progression, like you just described. And the progression was similar to the progression of a loan that tracks through the LOS. So you have these things that are happening even before a pre-qual. Right. And then you have your pre-qual. And then you get to application. And then you go through all the processes that eventually lead to a clear to close. And then we close and we fund. We'll take that same muscle and incorporate it or relate it to a recruit. Before the pre-qual, and we're kind of in the pre-qual stage, we need to identify our TAM, our total addressable market. And what does that market look like? And can we do it through data? In 2011, it was a lot harder to do it than it is ultimately today. But so then we load those people into an Excel spreadsheet at the time. Mm-hmm. Now we know who we need to reach out to. There's 1,000 people in your backyard, but here's 100 that we really need to start trying to build relationships with. 100 seems a whole lot more manageable than 1,000, of course. Right. And by the way, if I go call it 1,000, it's just going to take a lot of work to disqualify the 900 that aren't a fit for the value proposition anyway. So we get to the 100. Then we start having conversations. Once we have a conversation, we move them to what we call the candidate stage. The candidate stage is where we now have the beginning of a relationship, but the other party has not agreed to have a confirmed meeting yet. They haven't agreed to actually schedule time, confirmed to both ways, to talk about a specific topic. So we're managing and we're nurturing that relationship. Once they agree and we can get them to a meeting, now we move into the meeting stage. So you can kind of see how this goes from pre-qual to application to processing to underwriting to all the way through the process. So now we're going through the meeting, and the meeting stage can last a long time, depending upon, you know, the individual, the opportunity, and how long it's going to take you to show them how you can create value for them and their referral partners. Then ultimately they move to offer, and that offer stage can last a little while. And then they move to hire, and now they're in the retention bucket. So anyway, I'm having this meeting with the CEO in 2011, and he basically hands me a piece of paper that's got all these scribbly lines all over it, like an Excel spreadsheet. And he said, if you could build a technology platform that takes this so that I have full visibility across my entire organization, and the local managers have full visibility across what they're actually working on in a collaborative environment, that would create huge value for me. And we already had the idea. It was already on the whiteboard. But that moment was the moment where at least things got in motion with Model Match, the technology. And so, you know, fast forward 2018, Model Match was built and acquired the assets of Hammer House, which allowed us to combine everything under one roof. But the value that the technology is really creating, not only for the individual user, but the enterprise client, the company across the board and at the top of the house, is you have a single repository to now be able to manage the data analytics side to identify who do I want to talk to, individuals, branches, companies, whatever the case may be. So I can see exactly what they look like across a pretty deep data set: product mix, purchase to refi, average loan amount, unit count, what towns they're doing business with, who they're selling their loans to, everything. And then be able to take those and move them into a bucket, a status, where you can take actionable steps on those individuals. You can start to call them, you can text them, you can email them.
Those actionable steps.
You got to do something. I mean, you got to take action, right? Just because you have all the data, what does that mean? One of our business development guys had a great post on LinkedIn just the other day, and it was talking, for those that are sports fans, it was talking about Billy Beane, who is the general manager of the Oakland Athletics. There's a book and a movie called Moneyball that a lot of people have probably heard of. And Billy Beane was an analytics guy, and he came up with a concept that put the Oakland A's, at the time not a winning team, in a position to take advantage of analytics, which every baseball team does now and every sports team does now. But the point that Mike on the business development side was making was that all that is great. Somebody's still got to step into the batter's box and swing the bat.
Right.
You still have to do something. What Model Match also then helps hold you accountable to is the process of doing that something, and having a place where you can put notes, you can collaborate with your team, you can mention someone and they immediately see something on this person. You can update the data and the analytics on the individual that you're talking to, and you can leverage all of those things to do what? To give yourself a lot more time and a lot more efficiencies to focus on the things that are going to create the most value.
Right. And reduce
it is Tony, to not to interrupt you, but no, it is, to your point, and thank you for bringing it up. It is essentially an LOS for recruiting.
Yeah, because the one thing that you worry about the most in the loan process is a black hole, right? You don't want anything to get lost, because then you've devalued everything that you've done because you haven't finished the job. But that's the same way it is with recruiting, and that's the same way it is that you're talking about right now. And what Model Match brings to it is that is eliminated. Then you can see everything that's happening.
And you can see it across the organization. So you can invite lots of people onto your team, your regional manager, your area manager, operational support, the head of production, whoever, to have visibility into these projects so that you all can support each other. Look, recruiting is not a one-person sport. There's plenty of people that are successful doing it by themselves, but you're not scaling in any way. You're not scaling yourself. You're not leveraging other things about your organization that ultimately build the trust necessary for someone to finally say, I want to work with you. I want to work with you, and I want to work with your company. Model Match is a collaborative environment as well. It's not static. It's fully dynamic and customizable. So it is a collaborative environment. You made me think of something. So right when we rolled out Model Match, I was presenting to a group, and I said, anybody in the room, if I said, I'm making up a file, on the Smith file, if I said, where does the Smith file stand and what's the next action? How quickly could you tell me? And all of them were like, I mean, not instant, but super fast. Couple click of the keyboard, and I can see, oh, it's at this stage, and I see who's up next. I know who's accountable to the next thing in the box that needs to be checked. Awesome. Everybody in the room that has a pipeline of 10 active people in their recruiting pipeline, raise your hand. Lots of people raise their hand. How many of you, somebody give me a name, somebody you're currently talking to. And I'm telling you, Tony, I would go down the list. I'm not trying to make people feel bad, just proving a point. Oh, I'm talking to Joe Smith, right? I keep using the Smith name. Maybe we should come up with another one. Joe Adams. I'm talking to Joe Adams, right? Okay, great, awesome. So are you and Joe Adams are currently meeting? Oh yeah, man. Like we talk, and you know, I think I have a good shot at getting him. Awesome. What's the next action? Meaning day and time, and what exactly is it you're going to be talking about? I don't know. So you're basically having coffee every couple of weeks, and he maybe really likes this coffee shop, and he's happy for you to buy him a cup of coffee every couple of weeks. I mean, that's what's happening. Model Match solves that problem. It puts you in a position to be reminded that, hey, you know, let's think of our core components. Who should we pull in next as the next action? And then also, I mean, look, the system does little things like when you complete one thing, it says that's the next action. And it sort of forces you to disposition the next action. So to your point, Tony, there are no black holes. Look, anybody that's listening to this that's had any accountability to recruiting production, especially that would bring a transferable book of business, has probably had this experience. You have a killer conversation with somebody in January. It's real nice, totally positive. There's no reason why you can't keep that moving forward. You get super busy, personal, professional, whatever. 3 months later, you're like, oh man, I should totally give this person a call. So you go to your whatever to give them a call. Like, oh, I can't remember something about them. Let me look on LinkedIn. And 2 weeks ago, they joined one of your competitors. Right. Everybody's got that story. I guarantee you. That shouldn't happen. It happened because you had a black hole. Hold yourself accountable to the next thing. And that's one of the things that we set out to ensure that Model Match does, so that any user can utilize the platform to ensure that not only they're building a healthy pipeline, but they're staying on top of that healthy pipeline.
Right. Well, and you kind of talked about that the inception of Model Match was sitting down with someone in a conversation, and you guys were talking about how the process should look and how it should work. And he's like writing it all down, and he's like, okay, you give me this and it'll bring me value. And that's what you did. So that's fantastic.
Well, it also taught us that there's, you know, from our perspective, you know, we love coaching around best practices, and we learn every day, every week. I mean, one of the coolest things about now having a software platform is that anybody, you know, on this call or that listens to this, that's been involved in software technology of any kind, knows that it never ends. It's never built. It's never fully built. And if it is, well, then it's out of date tomorrow. Like it's quick, you know, it's quickly out of date. We actually like that. I mean, we've never wanted to be static. When Drew and I were building Hammer House, we were constantly, and look, we made a lot of mistakes. We were constantly looking at new ways to create value for not only the companies that we supported, but the industry as a whole, whether it's doing loan officer surveys and having conversations with companies like Stratmore and others that we know are creating value. You know, we could never be them, but we could certainly partner with them or talk to them and come up with ideas that would create value. Well, the software throws gasoline on that, because we're on calls and somebody says, boy, it sure would be cool if. Well, it's time and money. It doesn't mean we can't do it. Let's put it on the whiteboard and let's create some value. So that's been one of the most fun parts of the journey from just strictly the human capital side to now a technology platform where we can create value for anyone, even if we have never partnered with them, specifically doing the recruiting work with them or for them.
Right. Well, and you mentioned like the art of recruiting a non-sales position. So does that kind of play into this as well? Is that how you bring in your data and your analytics?
Not so much the data and the analytics. However, there is AI that can be utilized to identify individuals that have certain skill sets that maybe you can pull in from web scrape tools and things like that. And some of these we have, some of them we're also working on to enhance some of that functionality. But here's what I mean by that. I heard, I was at another event years ago, and the president of the company was someone who had actually been a loan officer, and then a branch manager, and then a regional, and then ultimately the president of the company, so overseeing everything. And she told a story about how when she was building her branch and then her region, she decided she was going to recruit more than anybody's ever recruited on the planet. I'm gonna time block 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day to just recruit. Well, what she figured out very quickly is she doesn't have 4 or 5 hours a day. It's not possible. And if you're the regional manager, good luck. Or even the branch manager or loan officer, you don't have that kind of time. So she had to come up with a more efficient way and a longer timeline. But she stuck to it, and she was consistent and predictable in her processes. We worked with her, so at some level there was hopefully some value there as well. But she figured out that after about a year, that ultimately she was no longer recruiting, because she knew everyone in her region that met the criteria that where value could be created both ways. Now it was just simply a matter of timing. It was a matter of timing and value. So now let's look at the operations or the non-sales side. Forget operations. If you could create relationships with the best processors, underwriters, product developers, folks in secondary and servicing or whatever, just because you're meeting these people at events anyway, and you can now plug them into a repository like Model Match and just create future tasks that put you in a position to not forget to stay in touch with these people. I might not need a head of product development right now, but what about the day that I do? Wouldn't it be nice that I already know 3 or 4 really, really good ones versus having to go to a third party, an executive recruiting firm, a search firm, and pay a 25, 30% fee to go find somebody that where I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm counting on somebody else to do the work for me, somebody that probably isn't as good at communicating the value proposition as I am. That's what I mean about the non-sales side. If you just use it to have an environment that allows you to take advantage of opportunity when the timing is right, you're not recruiting anymore, or at least you're recruiting a lot less. Because by the way, even if those 5 people I reach out to right now are not open, guess who they can lead me to? 5 more people that are just like them, that they've met at other events. So anyway, Tony, that's what I sort of mean by put yourself in a position where ultimately you find that most of the time is you're not actually recruiting anymore. You're just managing a valuable pipeline. And ultimately the hires will happen when the timing is right and when you're in a position to bring them on and they're in a position to say, hey, I'm ready.
Right. That's awesome. I want to remind everybody, this is TMC Connect. This is Eric Levin, and he is the co-founder and EVP of Client Development at Model Match. And if you've got questions, please drop them in the chat. I did send a little note out. I realized that I was like, oh, I didn't tell people how to, engage. So please send your questions in. We'd love to hear from you. You will get an email tomorrow as a follow-up from this session, and it'll have a link to a podcast as well as a YouTube. So you can go back and listen to all of the fantastic information that Eric has been giving us. And wanted to ask you, Eric, we've talked about Model Match, and we've talked about just the concept. And you've been in this industry for a long time, and you can tell that you're very passionate about it. So what other things in your life bring you passion?
Oh man, you didn't prep me for that question.
Sorry.
Well, I gotta say family, right? Like when I was a little kid, I wanted to make my parents proud, and as I got older, I want to make my wife and my kids proud, and so that brings me a lot of passion. I got a killer family. I got 2 boys that my youngest just left the house. He's in London. I've got my oldest is out west in Utah in college, and my wife and I are getting used to, I hate the term empty nesters. You're trying to find out, there's a lot of words I don't like, right? Like I don't like recruiting. I don't like empty nester, but we are empty nester. And how awesome is it that I clearly got lucky and was able to partner with someone who we really like each other. So we're spending a lot of time together because our kids aren't making noise around the house anymore. The other thing is I'm in a job, I'm in an industry where, especially the last couple of years, not a lot of travel, not a lot of face-to-face interaction. I'm sitting under, fluorescent lights in front of we've all built this Zoom muscle. We don't know what to do anymore if we're not on Zoom. But I like physical labor. I really like physical labor. And maybe that's one of the reasons why recruiting, building a pipeline, to me has always felt very comfortable because it feels like a sport. It feels like athletics. It feels like physical labor. At least I've tricked myself into thinking that's what it is. But outside of the office, I love to train. I just hired a boxing coach because I'm pushing 50 now, and I'm like, I need to learn something I didn't know how to do, and so I'm getting beat up a couple times a week, and I'm having fun with that. But
It's great.
It's a reminder that you're not as special as you think you are.
That's awesome. Hey, we did have a question that came in. It said, what is the number one must-have tool any recruiter should have in their tech stack?
I think that was a trick question, don't you? It's model match. Come
It's
on.
model match.
There's only one.
You only need that one tool and you'll be set.
Well, when we of course were several years ago when we started Model Match, we were convinced this is it. This is the tool. But what you figure out real quickly is that your users give you some experience that start to make you realize that we're close, but there's some things that we need to bolt on. And so, one of the things that came up a few years back were, I love Model Match. I love everything about it, but I have a problem. Okay, what's the problem? The problem is I don't know who to call. Now, Tony, I would tell you that from a coaching perspective, I saw that as an excuse in the beginning. What do you mean you don't know who to call? If you're a branch manager in Charlotte, North Carolina, are you telling me you don't know your competition? Are you telling me that you're not asking your referral partners who else is calling on them, who else they're sending loans to? Are you not looking at the other side of a transaction to just see who you're competing with as well?
Right.
But what I learned really quickly from our CEO, Kirk Waldfogel, who is our third partner, we brought Kirk in, Drew and I did when we thought we had this great idea for a technology platform, but we don't know anything about building a technology platform. Kirk reminded us that it's not our job to tell them that they're wrong. It's our job to create a solution for them. So that's where we then went to market, and we invested a tremendous amount of money and development into the acquisition of all the aggregator data, and then build it out in a really comfortable, usable fashion where the user can now see, oh, now I know who I should call. I can build out criteria and say, hey, just show me the people that do between $1 million and $2 million a month, heavy purchase, split between conventional and government in Mecklenburg County within a 10-mile radius.
Wow.
And click a button, shows me those people, and I can click on the 5 that I want, add them to a project, and start taking action on those people. So it's with the development of things like that I consistently and confidently say that when it comes to the number one, it's definitely the number one recruiting tool.
Mm-hmm.
It is Model Match, because you don't need to walk outside of the platform to go get those data and analytics tools to go make it happen. Here's the other thing I would say. Your best recruiters, look, I think I'm a good recruiter. I think that we have lots of good recruiters on our team. I think we're great. I think we're the best. However, the best recruiters at your company are your local managers, and they're your regional managers, and they're your heads of production. So before you start thinking that I don't have time to do it, maybe the problem is you don't have an efficient process to focus on just the things that create value, take action on those things, and then see how that over time creates value within your pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much, Jillian, for the question. Appreciate that. I do agree that it may have been it was a loaded question. Had a great answer.
It was a good loaded question.
Absolutely.
That person's getting a gift.
That's right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for attending. I do want to say, so Eric has a very popular podcast called The Walk, and it's available on Apple and Spotify.
Yeah, Apple,
anywhere you can find.
YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, YouTube, Spotify. It's called The Walk Podcast. I thought we called it The Walk because you were asking me about the people that we get on this podcast. The idea was to just go for a virtual walk with people is what it was. It's the things that you get to learn when you go for a walk with someone, right? I had Ken Perry on. Ken's the founder of the Knowledge Coop, which is a fantastic company out of the Pacific Northwest. And on my podcast, I asked Ken, I said, hey, when you've got some challenges within your company, you're dealing, you got to go through these challenges with staff. What do you do? He said, we go for a walk. So I mean, great.
There
We
you go.
named the podcast exactly what we should. But yeah, if you look up the Walk Podcast in my name, you'll find it. There have been some great industry leaders on there. And Tony, I've been around long enough that either I know these people or we kind of know each other. And I've been lucky
Right.
enough that a high percentage of people that I ask have said yes. If I can scale me a little bit more, I'd love to do more of them. But time is always the challenge. We have a lot of fun with it, and I learn a lot from those people. You know what? It's also really cool to be able to see, like, we had Phil Shoemaker on the last one, and Phil's runs the production channels for Home Point, and reports to Willie Newman, who's an icon in the industry, of course. And when I get to have people like Phil on the podcast and just rap like a couple of human beings, I had a lot of comments from people that say, I've known Phil for 20 years. I've learned 5 things about Phil today. I didn't know those things, because when those people are interacting with Phil or with Willie Newman or Dave Savage or Casey Cunningham or, you name it, a lot of the people we've had on the show, they're not asking them, well, how did you get started off in the business? And tell me about a time where the world was falling apart and you were failing. How did you muscle through those failures?
Tell me how you hurt your finger.
You listened to that one. Sorry, Phil. Sorry, Phil Shoemaker.
That's so funny. Well, it's a great podcast, so check it out. Eric, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a partner with TMC. We love you guys. You have just jumped in and have been super active. You're going to do a lightning showcase at Terranea. You're going to be on a panel for us. So if you guys are coming to Terranea, please look Eric up, and we'll hope to see you there. Thank you again for your time today. And this is TMC Connect. We appreciate you guys being here, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks guys.
Tony.
Appreciate it. Bye.